Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this another episode of the Prepper Podcast, and I'm joined today by Jet, the Australian Survivalist. How are you doing, Jet?
Very well, thank you, Mike. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the channel.
It's great to have you here. It's always good to have insights from other countries. You know, I'm not just scoping out where I want to emigrate to one day. I'm just, can you tell everyone where you're from, just so they know?
Sure. So I'm based out of Queensland, Australia, so out of Brisbane. So that's the sort of like northeastern side of this wonderful continent. Very tropical out here, and I've been out here for about 14 years in this part of Australia, although I've lived all over.
Excellent, excellent. And I have to admire your background. You've definitely put me to shame with my chaos that's going on at the moment.
I felt it. I felt I should put a little bit of effort in, considering you did me the courtesy of inviting such a small channel such as mine onto yours. I thought, yeah, put a few of the packs up that I've built over the years that I've taken out, sort of a bit of history behind me.
So we're going to push and promote your channel because the production value is awesome. We'll go into your YouTube channel afterwards, but to begin with, I have a regular set of questions that I usually ask guests, and it gives a good gauge across because we've had South African guests, we've had guests from Poland, all over the place. So it's great to see different answers. So the first question might seem weird, but are you a prepper? Do you class yourself as a prepper?
Yeah, look, I do. I think, look, what I do is prepping. I don't generally use the term prepper, and I think that's because, and I mean, obviously, no offense to anyone who you're a prepper yourself. Um, the term prepper is becoming very diluted, especially here in Australia. People, they prepare, they put a jump pack in their car. That's technically preparation. But I suppose a little bit more on the nose is, you can buy a ton of stuff off Amazon, throw it in a pack, grab a survival guide, throw it in a pack, throw it in a cupboard, never look at it again. And technically, you are a prepper.
A very unprepared one.
Yeah, exactly. I do prefer the term survivalist, not to get too caught up in the vocab, but because for me it's more of a lifestyle. There's probably not a weekend that goes by that I don't spend some time on what I'm doing in the world of prepping and surviving, getting out there, testing my skills, making sure the disciplines are still up to snuff, making sure the physical fitness is in. So yeah, look, I am a prepper. But you'll never hear me call myself one. I will always refer to myself as a survivalist these days.
That's quite interesting because I generally believe, obviously, the prepper movement can be generally pointed to the United States of like the origins kind of thing. And they kind of associate survivalist with the more extreme side of things. Like, the people at Waco were survivalists and things like that. So do you not find that stigma where you are?
Yeah, look, and I think that's true. Australia especially, there is a lot of Australia. Funny enough, even though we carry the Union Jack on our flag, we are far more influenced by America these days, especially in the last maybe 15, 20 years here in Australia. We'll find a lot of preppers over here very heavily influenced by American preppers, which is a very different culture. You won't generally watch an American prepper YouTuber or content creator that's not going to at some point talk about their AR-15. They're not going to start. They're always going to talk about, this is, how we're going to take back our country. This is how we're going to survive out there. This is how much ammunition we need. And that's because obviously they have a very different culture there. Obviously, a lot more gun positive in America. And I guess you have to be if everyone's got guns, and you've obviously got to talk about them a little bit because that's going to be part of survival. Hollywood, if it's taught us anything, is that if it hits the fan, everyone's going to be at each other's throats with whatever they've got. And in America, that happens to be a fairly high availability of semi-automatic weapons. But yeah, I think Australians do take a little too much influence from that, and that is again one of the reasons why I've sort of drawn the parallel. I've separated myself a little bit from that. So yeah, it is still prepping. It is still prepping, but I'm trying to get that little bit of distance between, look, this, yes, I haven't spoken about, firearms on my channel. I'm a licensed firearms owner, but it's not really something I focus on. Australia, we don't have the rules here that allow you to use firearms for self-defense, at least not since '96. So it's not really something that comes up. Firearms in the capacity that, I ever talk about them is always, hunting related, because that's our valid reason for having them here. So yeah, just trying to keep that sort of separation has been really why I've stayed away from the word prepper. But it's it's still the same thing. It is. We are preparing. It's just what is that word association these days?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I like that about your channel, that you're focused on where you are and like your rules around there. That's what I try to do, because there are so many people that just carbon copy these American channels, and it just doesn't fit in to like different locations a lot of the time.
It,
What other question is?
like a lot of
Sorry, go on.
sorry, I was going to say a lot of YouTubers, and not all of them by any means, but a lot of them will just regurgitate what they hear. They don't
Yeah,
necessarily like test that and see if that's fit for purpose, that fit for use for them. They think, oh well, I saw an American YouTuber do this. This is how they would survive in the mountains. That is probably not applicable. Australian terrain, Australian climate, Australian animal, Australian law, just availability of places you can go. America has a lot more freedoms. You can, in a lot of states, just walk out somewhere and just be in a national park. Here we
yeah,
have very strict rules, and except for like some places through Victoria where you are allowed to hunt on Crown land, you are not allowed to take firearms into those
yeah.
sorts of places, and you're not allowed to take arrows and take down bows into those sorts of places. So it's not really, you can't have that same experience
No,
that the
yeah,
Americans do.
it's very much the same here. It's very much the same here. You start walking out with your shotgun or your crossbow in full camo gear here, and you won't get to the end of the street before the armed police are on you.
Yeah, you're not going to get very far.
What started you prepping or becoming a survivalist?
Well, look, I've been prepping. Look, I'll use the term. I've been prepping for over 10 years now, and that took the form of just putting stuff in a bag, having stuff in a bag, because there's always the possibility of something happening. And then it wasn't until about 5 years ago that really sort of pivoted and became more of a lifestyle thing for me, where I was actually putting a lot of energy and effort into learning the skill set. I suppose the catalyst for me, I've ADHD, so I'm very overly analytical. I'm always overthinking a lot of things, and I guess to my detriment. But when you sort of, it doesn't take a genius to sort of open your eyes, look around, and see what's going on in the world, to say, well, regardless of what you're prepping for, there's a lot of different things that could be the tipping point, and it doesn't really matter what you're prepping for. Um, there's a lot of different potential situations that could occur. And I consider myself someone who preps very broadly,
Hmm.
to account for a fairly large spectrum of circumstances. But for me, it was just a case of looking and seeing that decline. Sort of I don't like saying my faith in the government, but my overall sort of respect that the system's going to keep working the way it's going to, was starting to decay. And that was
Hmm.
sort of like, I guess, the catalyst that sort of made me think, well, it's not really a roller coaster. It's more like a sinking ship. It's only going to go down from here. So going to need to start making some decisions now, because this isn't something that you can just check stuff in a bag and know.
Yeah,
You need to learn this stuff. You won't just go out there. People will buy a bow and they'll be, oh, I'm going to go, I'm going to become a bow hunter. It's like, oh, good luck. It took me 5 years to get good enough to hunt with a bow. And even by today's standard, I still consider myself a novice. There are people that have been doing it for 10 years. You won't just pick one up from the store and be an expert. So yeah, I suppose it was that
yeah.
need to start building that skill set now.
Yeah,
And
it's
so I've been
funny
doing that.
because them people that think they're going to go out and hunt and survive have obviously has probably never processed meat either. Their
No,
version of meat comes vacuum sealed at the supermarket, and that's it. They think they're going to put a
and,
ball through something, and a pack of mince is going to appear.
and this is it. And it's one of the, I've been very fortunate that I have friends that own property, and I've had the opportunity to see people field dress the kangaroos and so forth. Because that's something you generally won't be exposed to that, and there's not like a TAFE course that you can go do and learn this. It's something that you only really learn if you're exposed to it.
Hmm.
And so yeah, a lot of preppers, they especially if they're a bug out style prepper, you need to be able to trap, you need to be able to hunt, you need to be able to fish, you need to be able to do all of those things, not just one. Otherwise, you're not going to have a very good chance of survival. And one of the things that I've always sort of tried to relay to people that talk to me about this subject is, as preppers, I believe that we have between maybe a 20 to 40% chance of survival at best, the most prepared of us. And I give it that odd because there is just so many factors. All it takes is an infected wound, and that's it, you're done. So there's a very low chance of survival anyway. So everything that you can possibly do to give yourself that edge, you should be doing. And so again, that's why for me it was a big shift from prepping into then survival and practicing those skills. Because yeah, too many people, they just think, oh, I'll pick it up. It can't be that hard. I've seen them do it on, The Walking Dead. It's like that's
Yeah.
not really how it's going to work.
So is it fair to say that yours was more of a gradual realization of, like, I mean, Dan from startprepping.co.uk calls it the crumblies, or he's watched this, listened to a podcast that calls it the crumblies, and everything's slowly deteriorating, society and infrastructure, and people just not realizing because it's happening bits. Is that like the gradual process that started you prepping then?
I think for a long time prior to when I started prepping, I wasn't very aware of prepping and what it was. It very much had a stigma about it. It was very much perceived, again, from the American side. It was people hiding in their fallout shelters. This was this stigma, this perception, and
Goddamn
this is it.
documentary, Doomsday Preppers, ruined it for everyone.
Exactly, and I think we're very fortunate in our current time, because as platforms like YouTube and that have evolved, and it's given people a stage to be able to exhibit this type of information. And it's one of the things I aim to do as a content provider, as an emerging content provider, is get people aware that it's not what you think it might be, or what it might have been, portrayed to you 20 years ago. It's very much something that you can do now, and you don't have to have full hazmat gear, and you don't have to have a bomb shelter, and you don't have to live in America for this to apply to you. So yeah, for me, it was a case of, I started seeing things progressively getting worse. I was trying to be a bit of an optimist with it and go, oh, maybe, this is just and it obviously didn't. And that slow crumble was sort of like, okay, I'm going to have to start thinking about what am I going to do? And that obviously started very basic, let's just get some supplies. Let's just think about having, some extra provisions at home. Let's not just do just in time shopping. Let's have something to fall back onto.
Yeah.
And then from there, it grew with momentum. And it was a case of, oh, well, let's think about this rationally. Like, this is only going to last X amount of time. How much water can I store? Well, not enough. I'm going to need to have filtration capabilities. And especially as you start looking into things like bugging out, which became more of a thing a few years into that prepping for me, you start seeing that there's a whole world of equipment that you need, a whole world of skills that you need to be able to filter water, to be able to gather food, and so forth. So yeah, it's been the slow decline has been the opposite for me. It's ramping up, and I find as I see things get worse, and things without sounding like too much of an alarmist, I do feel like things are getting worse. I start focusing more heavily on, okay, starting to become a bit more of a reality now. Let's make sure all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. Those jerry cans, I should probably fill them with diesel. I know that I could, but I should probably fill them now. You know what I mean? So that's sort of been the journey for me, so to speak.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Are you prepping for a specific thing? People that watch my channel regular know that when I started, it was the Carrington event. Obviously, the state of the world at the moment, that evolves. But are you prepping for a specific scenario?
I think for me, I prep for a very broad array of things, and I do that because there's so many different things it could be, and there's a good argument for most of them. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that there's a lot of logic in a lot of these theories. A lot of preppers say it's going to be an EMP, or it's going to be the Carrington event, and a lot of them say, oh, well, we're going to be looking at financial collapse. I mean, the world can go into chaos with financial collapse. And I've watched a ton of content about just how precarious the financial system is in the world. And I mean, the ruling class is never going to probably let that, crumble too quick, but there's always that possibility. And then, with how the state of affairs is, that, there could be a war. And I mean, Australia is pretty by itself out here. But we do have a strategic place, especially if you want to go invade China. Australia is a staging point for that. We are very close with the Americans here. We have Pine Gap here, which is the American spy base, the American Australian spy base, which is one of the largest in the world. So we do have a bit of a target painted on our back. So for me, I like to think that I prep for a fairly broad spectrum of things. I mean, obviously there's some, you know, some SHTF situations. You know, if they drop a chemical bomb on us, we're probably cooked, right? I'm probably not going to know that that's coming. CNN's not going to tell me. It's just going to happen. If we get you know, suddenly an overnight pandemic with a massive mortality rate and no one sees it coming, which is probably unlikely, but that's another, you know, maybe you can't get away from that. But the things that I feel that I can get away from, you know, if we start seeing, oh, well, you know, there's now scarcity, maybe it's just a collapse of social services, whatever it happens to be, I feel like I can account for that. And things
Yeah.
like, yeah, look, I do make accounts for things like EMP. Obviously, I use Faraday bags for a lot of my electronics. I make my own Faraday bags up, and that's because, you know, yes, it's not a foolproof thing. If they send an EMP off above my head, the attenuation value probably isn't going to be high enough to protect it, but hopefully it is. So I still account for that, you know, because it could be. Do I think that will be it? It's probably not at the top of my list, but I still prepare for it, because wouldn't I be silly? Oh, look, I did all this preparation and you knocked out my radios and you knocked out all of my digital gear, because I didn't believe that that was a possibility.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know,
It's personal circumstance, right? As well, you know, if you prep everything for a fire in your home, but live next to a river and didn't do any preps for flooding, there's no sympathy if you get flooded out.
exactly right. And I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of crossover with the stuff when you prep for bugging out, especially. There's a lot of crossover. I mean, other than saying, oh, you know, it's you know, a biological, and you're starting to talk about specialized hazmat gear, and I know people who do go down that path. It's not something I've done. You are covering most bases to an
Mhm.
extent. Um, Even if it's, you know, not the longest term solution, you should be all right for a while.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't really matter what it is. I think probably the kicker is, I think whatever event it is for me is it's more than likely going to be a bit of a slow burn, and I think that's what a lot of survivalists don't always expect. Like, we think it's going to be like, you know, it's going to be like the zombie apocalypse. It's
Yeah.
going to be like, oh,
Overnight
we
bomb, you
just
know.
we just go, and it's like
Yeah.
you. It's, I think it's more likely that we're going to see this progressive decline, and the problem is knowing when do you go. When do you make that call? You know, are you waiting till rule of law falls off, or are you going preemptively? And if you're going preemptively, are you prepared for the consequences of doing that, of walking out and to somewhere you may or may not should, you know, may or may not be, you know, necessarily welcome with a firearm is probably not the smartest idea. But
Yeah.
you know, wait too late, and next thing you know, you've got closures like we saw during the pandemic, especially here in Australia. And I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, otherwise you'll get one of those warnings along the bottom of your video saying consult the Australian government for official
we,
information. But we saw like a lot of restrictions here.
Mhm.
Freedom of movement was restricted across. Queensland was fairly lucky. Our freedom of movement was restricted, but not like it was in other states. It got very totalitarian style government down there. A lot of people didn't believe that could happen. But
Same
my
here.
point
Yeah.
is that when that happens, your freedom of movement is removed, and then, oh, it's too late to go. They're already blockade. I don't know, that sounds a little conspiracy, but there's already blockades. You can't leave now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the balancing game. So I try to prep for everything. Will I know when to leave? Will I know what the thing is before it? I'm hoping I will. But I guess there's also that possibility, you know, I have to guess it. Oh, you know, the next thing is like a bird flu and it's got a ridiculously high mortality rate and it's, you know, killing people in droves. Maybe at some point we go, all right, that's the thing. And I'm sure people bugged out when the pandemic hit. I'm sure there are people that went, nah, screw it, this is it, this is the end of days.
Mm.
You just gotta give it best guess, don't you?
Yeah, I think in that situation as well, you have to have some sort of prep that says, okay, if I'm completely wrong and in 2 weeks' time everything's back to normal, I've got to be able to make sure, you know, don't burn your house on the way out thinking you're never coming back. Yeah. So you pretty much, you might have kind of answered this offhand, but the next question is usually bug in or bug out. What's the
So
plan?
I think everyone who homesteads bugs it. Well, I'm going to say, because this is where the term gets a little bit grey. So some people consider, you know, homesteading to still be bugging in, and I do. I consider bugging in to be homesteading.
Yeah.
Bugging out for me in the context that we use it is generally going bush. I think, look, the homesteaders, the people who bug in, are always going to have an advantage because they have the infrastructure. So I would love to have the capability to do that. Unfortunately, I was born in the wrong era. You know, back when you could buy half a mountain in Australia for £2. You can't do that anymore, and it's very, very difficult to obtain land and
Mm,
to have just a piece of something sitting, 1,000 kilometers away.
yeah,
So for me, bugging out has become sort of it's a necessity at the time being. If I could pivot, you could ask me this in 5 years. We last that long. If you ask me again in 5 years, I might go, no, look, you know what I've done? I've got a spot now. I've invested my money. I've moved some assets around. I've got this spot out in the, because it's cheap enough when you go far enough out,
yeah.
and that's relevant. And it doesn't need to, you need to really have that much infrastructure there as long as it can support you. So yeah, look, for the time being, it is bug out, which is not ideal, with fairly low chances of survival of someone bugging out. But yeah, if in the perfect world, I think I think I'd like to be like those of us who are lucky enough to homestead. I think they will have the last laugh.
Yeah, I mean, space is often the issue. Same over here. Land is the price is going up astronomically, and it's becoming harder and harder to come by. I'm the same as you, born in the wrong era.
Yeah,
um,
sorry,
bugging
you
out
didn't you
though.
didn't get in quite early enough.
No, no, definitely not. Neither did my parents or my grandparents. um, bugging out though, obviously, it's circumstantial in the UK. It's quite a small area. More than 20 people bug out and you're going to bump into each other. Maybe not that
Yeah,
extreme, but bugging out to the deadly outback. 40 people a year on average die in the Australian outback in peace times, being
yeah.
unprepared and not having water, dehydration, all sorts of reasons. Oh, what's that friendly spider? It's not that friendly. Is that like part of your, do you have to prep a lot more for where you're bugging out?
Look, I think the tales are true. Internationally, Australia is known that everything in Australia wants to kill you, and it's not that far from the truth. We have a lot of deadly things here,
Hmm.
and if you walk in unaware, yeah, there's 101 things that can get you. There's definitely been some great content that's been put out by Bushmen here that have shown people going to gather water from a billabong. So obviously, that's a body of water. Um, you can get hit by a croc because it's just chilling in there and you didn't think. So there's a way to gather water so that you don't lose your arm. And a lot of people wouldn't always think about that. I mean, it depends where you are. I mean, I'm in Queensland. This is pretty heavy with those type of aquatic things. But we've got all sorts here. We've got spiders that can kill you very easily.
Hmm.
One bite, that's it. You're done. We have snakes that are obviously incredibly deadly, and the same thing. They tend to be near water sources, which is generally where you need to be as well.
Yeah.
So look, it's not so much about. I'll use the word preparation very, very loosely here. It's not about the equipment that you have in that case. It's about the knowledge that you bring to it, being able to identify the habitats of where these dangerous animals tend to be, understanding, what do you do if you encounter one? There's the old, the T-Rex. Its vision is based on movement. What is your reaction when you see a brown snake? What is your reaction if you stumble across, a spider that is dangerous? You find one in your tent. If you're operating near a water source and you know that there are crocodiles, that what are you going to do about that? So yeah, look, there is that aspect to it. And the further north you go, I would say in Queensland, the riskier it gets. We're okay where we are here in Brisbane, but when you start getting much further north, especially up Cairns Way, it is a bit precarious.
Hmm.
As far as like bugging out's concerned, like tomorrow, if you were to say, all right, you got to get out of Brisbane, a lot of Australia is desert. And without discounting people that have the skill to survive in desert, I'm not saying that's untenable, but the average survivalist is not going to have a very good time trying to survive in desert. You're making your life very, very difficult. Water is something that I'm always banging on about in every one of my videos. I'm sure people are sick of it. But just of how critical that is and how much water you consume just walking a few kilometers. This is why people tend to then be like, okay, well, we want to stick to green, basically. Look at a map of Australia, you want to stick to green. So you're pretty much not going more than 500, depending on where you are in Australia, you're probably
Yeah.
not going more than 500 kilometers inland. Anything beyond that, you're starting to, and again, bit of poetic license here, because that does vary depending on where you start that around our island. You're going to start hitting stuff that's very bushy, very desert, starting to get a bit straggly. You want to
Yeah.
try and keep in those denser areas because there is animal habitat in there that you can hunt in. There's plenty of water in those areas, but there's also things that can kill you in those areas. So yeah, you do have to. You can't just throw the book in your bag and expect that you're going to survive. You need to understand, and it doesn't take a lot to understand the dangers. Just look up Australia's deadly animals,
Yeah.
and go. Yeah. There's tons of people talking about, this is what happens if you encounter one. This is what you should forget. It'll scare you shitless, but at least you'll know.
Yeah.
I'm a survivalist who's scared of spiders, which is, I can handle snakes, I can handle scorpions, I can handle crocs, but you put a spider in front of me and I'm like, oh fuck, don't really like that. So I'm already staying away from them a fair bit. I don't like, but yeah, there are a lot out there that can do you harm. So yeah, you do have to put a little bit more thought into it than perhaps in some area. I'm not saying that other countries don't have their own risks, but that is something in Australia that is things like to kill you here.
Yeah, I'm a big preacher of practice sort of thing. So it's like a lot of people will put a bug out bag together, put it next to the door, or whatever, and that's it, set and forget. And they think that's fine. But you need to go out and do these things, right? Especially if you're somewhere like yourself and there is more of a remote location. If you think you're going to hike 20k to the coast and you've never hiked more than 1k, you're in for a big shock, right? So do you train a lot?
100%. Yeah, so physical fitness is obviously a massive thing that that everyone really needs to promote. It's a little bit upsetting because I do see a lot of American survivalists that obviously these are the center, because everyone wants to see fun guns, and they don't push that side of it. And especially in America, you're carrying a lot of weight because now you're carrying magazines. You're carrying, most of these guys running ARs, 5.56, it's heavy ammo, and they don't really talk enough about the level of fitness. Some do, credit where credit's due. Some do. But a lot of them don't. They're too busy trying to hock you a survivalist shovel in their sponsorship. They don't really talk about these critical things like, look, you need to have physical fitness. I was unfortunate enough that I actually had an injury about a year and a half ago. I was on a walking stick. I was doing a doctor house for 6 months. And my physical fitness went through the floor because I wasn't able, because I try to walk at least 7 kilometers every night at a minimum. And that's just that's unloaded. That's just through my area. And I wasn't doing anything at all. And I put on weight. It crashed. So it's been something that I have to work on a fair bit to maintain that. As I've gotten older, it's obviously harder to keep the weight off. I'm a tradie. That's what I do for a job. So some days I'm very active, and other days I'm not. I'm up a ladder half the day, and that's not enough. So yeah, it is something that needs a lot of focus, and it is something that I'm hoping does get more attention. Because if you don't have the physical fitness, it doesn't matter how cool your pack is or how many toys you have, you're never going to get there. And if you're bugging out, your pack is probably going to be pretty damn heavy. I float around about the 30-something kilo mark at the moment, and that's only because my partner has the rest of my equipment. So collectively, we form this force. We're able to carry I think it's like not quite 60 kilos, probably more like 50 kilos of equipment, which is a lot. But if you're trying to start from scratch again with zero and you want like the best possible chance, and yeah, you've got to be able to walk a long way up gradients, not just flat ground, with a heavy pack, and not die or screw your feet up, because then you're gonna be shit out of luck.
Number one rule of prepping: don't die.
Yeah, that's it.
Are you a lone wolf or part of a group?
So I'm actually very fortunate to have my other half that supports my efforts. I do have friends that are sort of into the prepping scene, but more a lot lighter, prepper light, right? Diet prepper. Not really high enough that I would turn around and say to them, guys, we're going, and they would actually go. I don't think they would. I think I think there'd be stragglers there. I think I'd have some difficulty convincing the other half, depending on how bad things aren't yet. But no, I'm a big believer that there are 2 rules to Survival Club. The first rule of Survival Club is never try to survive alone, which is only ever superseded by the second rule of Survival Club, which is don't try to survive alone. So many people are going to go into the mountains and they're going to be this lone wolf, and it's all going to come together, and they're going to be up there with their sniper, and that's just not the reality of it. If you catch a cold and you can't hunt, who's looking after you? You've got nothing, absolutely nothing. If you bust your foot, you're going to die. You are going to be burning calories even sitting there, and no one's going to gather anything. You're not going to have the supplies. So
everyone has to sleep, right?
that's it. And that's another thing. Especially in those initial, few weeks, especially the first few days, but in those first few weeks, at the risk of circling into what the Americans talk about, you are going to be maintaining a pit. To some extent, you are going to need some level of security set up because you don't know who's going to stumble upon you. You don't know if it's going to be an animal or it's going to be someone else. We've had, since 2022, we've had almost 1 million people immigrate to this country. And I'm sure a lot of them will probably have the idea. They might not, necessarily subscribe to my channel, but they may wander their ass out to where I'm choosing to bug out.
Yet.
Yeah. And if they're out there, and I bump into them, then, maybe that's good. Circling up the wagons is great. Have a group, distribute that work, but not necessarily everyone is going to be friend. And, that's something you have to consider. So having someone who can, watch your back while you're sleeping, you can, have someone who can look after you, you can look after them. Just being able to split your load, cross-loading your gear is a massive advantage. And just being able to break up tasks. Trying to do everything alone, you will run a calorie deficit within the first few days, and you just won't get anything accomplished. You're going to take so long to say. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you are playing with like slim odds, tiny odds that, one thing goes wrong, you slice your hand open trying to cut that tree down, and now what? Can you take a steady shot? Can you steady your bow? Can you draw? If you're running a firearm, can you keep that centered on where you're going? Can you keep on target? There's just so many things, and that's just like one of a million. And so I'm very much a believer. Don't survive alone, and I'm hoping that as time goes on, I can grow that group. I would love to have a group of maybe 6 people. Would be absolutely fantastic. That really sort of, you want to build a community. Survivalists need to get past this whole, oh, it's so cool to be alone, and move into that aspect of you need to rebuild.
Stop
your
watching
society.
Rambo and Commando. Stop watching.
Exactly.
Enjoy Arnold and Sylvester, but other than that, don't try and do it.
Realize that Hollywood ends at Hollywood. You aren't John Wick. You aren't going to be the next lone wolf. You need, and at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, humans, we're social people. We need to build that community back up, and you're going to live in the mountains for the rest of your life. I mean, yes, I'm sure some people that will appeal to them, but you're going to want to start building that community back up. You watch any post-apocalyptic movie, and they'll share one thing usually in common, which is communities start forming together. And it's Hollywood, but it tracks with how humans are. We want to build community back up. So starting off with having a few numbers, that's great. And if you can bring people into that circle, do it. It's going to make your life easier. You're going to be able to double up on gear. If we're going to keep building these shelters while we go and hunt, or we're going to go over here and we're going to do this thing while you guys go do that thing. And that's the division of labor. It's just 101 how to survive.
Yeah, definitely. You might dispel this as a myth, but Australia, on most of the mutual assured destruction maps and stuff like that, and all the disaster scenarios, seems to be a safe zone. And for that reason, I've spoke to quite a few UK preppers when we've talked about getting out of Dodge, as in the collapsing, ridiculous UK at the moment. Starmageddon, sorry. Australia's been one of the...
Funnily enough, sorry, I'll just interject because I will forget to mention this. Mainstream, okay, so just for context, mainstream media in Australia is completely captured by government. We have had no coverage of your riots at all in mainstream media. So all the riots that were going on, not a single free-to-air channel covered it. Not one. Not a single one. And you know why? Because we're in an election year, and the government here, which obviously owns the media, doesn't want Australians thinking that civil disobedience is a path to anything. So they'll show us the war in Ukraine. They'll show us, Gaza and all that. But you want to talk about the UK? We have the Union Jack on our freaking flag. We have the Queen still on our coins because we haven't changed that yet. But yet we go, oh, we're not going to pay attention to what's going on in England.
It's
boy,
that's definitely a decision.
Yeah,
that's definitely a decision that's been made higher up to say, let's not have this as an influence. That's very interesting. It's good to know, definitely. But hopefully most people who are survivalists or preppers in Australia realize mainstream media is not the best source for your
No.
information.
Mainstream media is good for like the little tip-offs, like the sort of like, oh, the opposition is attacking the current government about something. Okay, good. That means that there's something else going on. So it's a good idea to see what legislation they're pushing through that week. Because
Yeah,
normally when that focus shifts, they're running like Australia. A lot of people don't know that Australia is probably one of the most surveilled countries in the world. We all think, say surveillance state, everyone says China. If anyone's been more than five, and this is going to sound very conspiratory, and I know I'm really playing into that trope, but we have more surveillance in this country than almost anywhere else. We have so many bills specifically about watching people and seeing what they're up to on social media, seeing what they're up to in their daily lives, interception bills, the ability to, and it's all been rolled out in the last, few like 5-6 years, and they do that because they as they see things getting worse and they see things going on in Britain, they don't want that to happen here.
yeah.
So yeah, it is if you keep your ear to the ground, yeah, it's happening. It is happening.
Yeah, and with the pandemic that you mentioned before, seeing how quickly the regular people conform to them rules
Oh
without
yeah,
batting an eyelid is scary. Because that's scary how
we
any government in any country can become that totalitarian, that 1984 Big Brother, and that we're just
oh
happy
yeah,
to, like in the UK, every Thursday going to the door clapping for the NHS. It's
yeah.
it's like they were just sat there thinking, what else can we make them do?
Yeah. And the thing is like you wind the clock back 15 years, and the government used to sort of try to hide their lies, right? They'd lie about something. It's politicians, right? All politicians lie.
Yeah,
But they'd make up an excuse. Now they don't even make up an excuse. They will outright lie about something. They will do the opposite of what they said they're going to do, and they won't own it. They won't talk about it. That's just how it is now. That run
yeah.
along, keep
Off you
paying your
go.
taxes,
Yeah.
off you trot. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's become the thing. So this is again, these are sort of the catalysts I think behind a lot of us starting to get a little bit more serious about prepping. My apologies, I completely derailed
No,
your
no, this
question
this
with
is
that.
this is what it's this is why it's unscripted. This is what it's all about. It's little tidbits that are great, and I'm sure a lot of people in the UK think that everybody in the world is seeing these riots on the
No,
news.
no.
But yeah, it's really good to know that as well. Yeah, so I was mentioning Australia is one of these safe zones in like mutually assured destruction and nuclear war and stuff like that. So lots of people I speak to talk about emigrating there for that reason. Is that a myth? Because you mentioned before about the spy base. Do you think
So
it less need to be
the
prepped?
if this is Australia, roughly,
Hmm.
the spy base is basically dead in the center. It's up in the Northern Territory, almost dead center of Australia, bit north bias. So if they try to blow that up, it's probably not going to take out the rest of the country. The problem isn't so much about Pine Gap. I mean, Pine Gap is obviously a target. Any force is going to look at that because it's feeding intelligence information to the US, and it feeds it to obviously Australia as well. But we obviously have fairly close. We're an island nation. We have a fairly close relationship with America, especially around things like naval ports. And the population in Australia, unlike America, is very much around coast. So that's where the water is, funnily enough, and that's where all the ports are, which is exactly where the Americans are going to stage their ships. As I think I mentioned briefly before, we're sort of the gateway to China. Now, I'm not saying we're going to war with China, right? That's a bit of
Hmm.
fear mongering here, but just for context, big military up there. If we were gonna poke that bear, Australia it's the stopover. It is the staging point, and it's one of the
Yeah,
reasons why America has such a close relationship with us. It's one of those big reasons behind the whole AUKUS thing is because they want to use Australia as that is where you refuel, right? Um, for that reason, a lot of people think, Australia, a lot of people perceive us as this very neutral country. Everyone's gets
yeah,
on with each other, g'day mate type thing. I don't really know. I think that's a perception thing. I think it's a bit of like looking at Australia through rose-colored glasses. When people get over here, they realize things are a lot different. I speak to a ton of them. I have a lot of American friends, not necessarily preppers, just American friends. And a lot of them are shocked when I tell them about like surveillance and stuff that goes over here and the lack of freedoms that we have over here. They're very surprised. That's not their perception. No. That's not how it is. And it's like, no, it is. We don't have freedom of speech in this country, not in the way that you do. We don't, go down that rabbit hole, but we don't have a lot of things that you guys do. And I think that's in the same vein as people thinking, oh, I'll move to Australia to be a safe place to go. Um, I think that very much depends on what the shape of things to come looks like. If America gets dragged into another large-scale war, or God forbid Australia gets dragged into it as well, especially if it's posturing between us and China, or who knows. Australia is going to become one of those nodes. And that's one of the reasons why we do have political parties here that are pushing to distance ourselves from America, specifically because we paint this massive target on our backs. Obviously, America is really good at pissing people off, by saying, "Hey, look, guys, come here and have exercises with us and put your ships in our ports and refuel here and resupply and refuel." We create a big target. Now, yes, right now you're generally not seeing battleships pulling into Brisbane and Sydney and so forth. Occasionally you see one every now and then as part of like a media thing. But you go time of war, and they're going to be going to every port that they can get their hands on. And I think that if that's what we're talking about, if we're saying, okay, well, how is Australia going to be down the line if if America gets into a conflict, or if we get into a conflict? I honestly don't think there's a safe place on Earth, but I definitely wouldn't call Australia a haven. I think you're probably better off going to Norway or somewhere like that, where just no one cares about Norway. It's lovely up there. Norway's not going to war, I don't think. Greenland, Iceland, places that people don't think about that kind of thing. I think you're less likely to get into conflict than in Australia, who has very much allied ourselves with the US. So yeah, no, look, I do think there's a bit of a misconception there. I'm not saying that we are as big of a target as some places would be. I couldn't tell you with any assurance whether or not Australia has nuclear armaments from America. There's been talk for years that we do have a few silos here. They're not ours, they're America's. Obviously, we're a strategic launch location. I imagine they're out in the middle of nowhere as well. I doubt they're hiding under Brisbane City. But still, there will be stuff here. And it'll really come down to, will they put boots on the ground? Is Australia strategic enough for another force to want to capture it? Or is it one of those things where they just want to blow us into oblivion so they don't have to deal with the Americans refueling here? So yeah, there is, don't think that Australia is going to be safe. I think especially on those coastal areas, it's going to be a time if things kick off, for sure.
You've just destroyed so many of my viewers' dreams who just think Australia is what you see on Home and Away and Neighbours, and everyone's lovely and everyone's happy and everyone's spending all the time on the beach.
In 1991, I think we did. I remember a lot of stuff about 1991 being like that, but not in recent years. We're not. It's look, and it's great that Australia has that perception. It's great for our tourism. But from a serious survivalism, if I was saying to someone, if someone was giving someone survivalist advice, Australia would not be at the top of my list. And especially if you're saying, oh, I want to come to Australia and I want to be a survivalist. If we say that the big event doesn't happen for 10 years, I can pretty much guarantee you within 10 years they will have disarmed us all. They're trying very, very heavily. I'm not going to turn this into a firearms debate because I'm very vocal on that.
Don't worry, you're preempting my next question.
but we will. So that is. I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I'll let you ask you a question. But I think that there will be more restrictions placed on Australia. We will be under more and more surveillance, as we already are. So look, you've probably got it better where you are, depending on where you're coming from. I wouldn't say that to a Brit, because I think Britain's definitely doing it. We're using Britain as a gauge, because whatever happens there tends to then happen here. So we're sort of looking at Britain and we're looking at Canada and we're going, oh my God, what is going on? And we know we're next. We know that is going to have its own flavor here. But it is going to happen here. So
it's like I said, the laws here, that if you've seen, are just getting ridiculous now. I think it's on the 24th of this month, they are banning what they class as zombie knives. To qualify as a zombie knife, it's a certain length, it's a serrated edge, it's got a point. There's all sorts of stipulations. Zombie knife used to have to say some sort of killing thing along the side.
Had to say zombie or had like a biohazard label or something.
It used to be that, but no, this is going to affect anyone who thinks who has the Rambo style knives or the survival knives or the big combat knives. It's going to affect loads of people. And obviously our firearms laws are very strict. We've had a recent crossbow incident, which we all think crossbows are going to be licensed or banned soon. and they're just, like you say, slowly disarming us. And how do you
So
control a
we've
nation? You disarm them, right?
yeah,
What's
100%.
what's your laws like with that? How do they follow on from the UK?
Sure. So I'll give you sort of the lowdown of how it is here because I don't know enough about UK firearms law. I do subscribe to some channels that do talk about it.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm a sports shooter. I do long distance sports shooting, and that's nothing to do with survival. That's just something I enjoy doing.
Mhm.
So I do keep an eye on what's going on in Britain because sometimes that's a thing. So look, I'll start with knives, and I'll get into the guns next. So Australia has, because we aren't big on firearms, we've always had a lot of restrictions around knives because it is the device of choice to do bodily harm.
Yeah.
In recent times, it has become under a lot more scrutiny. It's actually quite interesting that we're having this conversation now. Queensland, I'll talk about Queensland specifically because we have too many variations between jurisdictions here. But up here in Queensland, we've recently had a law enacted called Jack's Law. There was I apologize to anyone watching this if I'm misquoting this because I only got bits and pieces of it. Basically, there was a stabbing. What that's done, knee-jerk reaction. Police in Queensland now have the right to stop and search you without warrant to see if you have a knife on you. If you can, and there's no, it's not about length. It's about having a knife on you. So in Queensland specifically, in Australia broadly, but in Queensland specifically, you have to have a reason to have a knife on your person. So if you have a box cutter on you and a police officer says, okay, you have a box cutter on you, go, oh well, I work as a storeman. I'm coming from my job. Here's the box cutter that's in my pocket. That's why. I'm out camping. I have a knife because I'm out there filleting fish. Again, that's a reasonable excuse. As long as you're not going into public to cause fear, which is generally how they phrase it, then you're usually okay. But if you are just wandering around Brisbane City with a knife on your belt, you're going to get charged because they don't like that, and because there's been incidents with people going around and stabbing people because that's apparently what we're all about here. It's not good. So we've seen a restriction on that, and so that is now becoming bigger. There's now laws about not being able to sell knives to anyone under the age of 18. So you can't even buy so much as a kitchen knife. If you try and buy one at the shop, they will check you for ID. That was never that was a thing usually for like hunting knives, but kitchen knives, like where do they draw the line? Like a paring knife? Do I need a
It's the
So
same
it is
here.
getting a lot stricter.
Mhm.
It is getting a lot stricter, and I understand why. We are seeing a lot more. We are seeing a lot more violence, and it's because times are getting tough. Money doesn't buy as much as it used to anymore, and people are getting angry. So the knives are coming out because they're easy to obtain. So we are seeing that. So that's becoming a bit of a problem, and it does mean, like, for example, I don't generally carry. I have a Leatherman. I carry a Leatherman Signal as part of my EDC. It does have a small blade on it, as most Leathermans do. I actually don't keep it on my belt anymore. I used to, but after they've passed this law, it's now in my bag. So I leave it in my bag because technically I do technician's work. So because I've got pliers and that, it gives me a reasonable excuse to have it. But it's in my bag, so it's not on my person. It's very difficult to get at, so I can't grab it quickly. Gives me more of a defense when it comes to that.
Wow.
Swapping gears, talking about firearms. So Australia has, obviously, as I mentioned before, a lot of different jurisdictions. So firearm laws do vary from state to state quite drastically. For example, in New South Wales, we have what's called appearance laws. So you can't have guns that look too scary. It's a gun, but if it looks scary, you can't have it. So AR style, so we're obviously not allowed semi-automatics here in Australia. Well, I'll rephrase that. Normal people aren't allowed semi-automatics here in Australia. You can if you're a pest controller. You can apply for a special category license for a semi-automatic rifle, but they're very, very heavily regulated. But we do have a lot of AR style. I have an AR style pump action rifle in 308. In every other state other than this one, you cannot own it because it looks scary. And it's got nothing to do with the caliber. It's got nothing to do with the cartridge it takes. It looks scary, and so they don't want you to have it. Which is kind of weird because you wouldn't take it out of the house anyway, because even if it doesn't look scary, you still get arrested for going into public to cause basically panic, right?
Yeah.
In Queensland, we've just had a new set of laws passed. We're very, very lucky that we had one of our political parties here, not part of our two major ones, actually got some of those changed in the last 4 hours before it got snuck through, where they wanted to make it even stricter to obtain a firearm. It is very difficult to do that in Australia. When I got my firearms license, it took me about 2 months to get it. You've got to go do a firearm safety course, and they've got to decide whether you're a fit and proper person. Even once you've got your firearms license, you can't just go buy a gun. You have to then apply for that rifle, and they have to, or whatever type of firearm it is, doesn't have to be a rifle, and then they'll decide whether or not they're going to give it to you. They're going to take into account, why do you need that rifle? Why do you need that caliber? And there's a lot of sort of backwards and forwards that they do in the background to think about it. And that's every time you buy one. So from day dot, it'll take you almost 2 months to get it. Then you're going to be waiting 30 days mandatory waiting before you get your first one. And then, yeah, every subsequent one, you're still going to be waiting at least 2 or 3 weeks to get it approved, assuming they do. But that recent set of laws, those rolling laws, were trying to make it harder and harder for you to obtain one. So basically looking for disqualifying. So in order to have a firearms license in Australia or in Queensland, you need to be what's called a fit and proper person. That is a very vague thing that they tend to, they vary it depending on how they feel. So they're looking at things like, if you've had too many speeding tickets, you're not a fit and proper person. And they will refuse you a firearms license. If you have a firearms license and you do something they don't like, if you yell at someone with a road rage, I don't like you, F this, F that, and that person reports you, it is very possible that you will lose your firearms license because you've been engaged in basically verbal abuse. They think you are now a threat and they will come and take your guns. Now, I don't know how many instances that has actually happened, but it does happen. And so it's one of the things as a firearm owner, I can be very, very careful. It's one of the reasons why they don't feature on my channel, because I can't talk about firearms in the context of a survival tool, because that is not one of the approved reasons to own one. I'm allowed to own one for hunting and I'm allowed to own one for sports shooting. Those are the terms on my license. So when I talk about them, it's purely in the context of, well, I'm going out bush, I'm going to go hunt something because I can. I don't go, well, guys, let's go out and hunt something for survival, because once I start saying that, then people are going to get in the comments, oh, but what happens if someone sneaks up on you? Could you shoot them? You just do not want to go down that dialogue in Australia, because the police are looking for any reason to take it away. So we are seeing a ramp up. And one final thing I'll say about that is actually recently we had a shooting in Queensland, rural Queensland, which was people who brought some firearms across the border. It was big news. 2 police officers were shot and killed. They will not let go of that. They won't. It's in the news all the time because we're on an election year and they're looking for a reason to justify increasing the requirement. Funnily enough, in the same year, we had a police officer go rogue and murder 2 people with a gun just because, he could. Just picked up his service gun and shot some people. They didn't take the guns away from the police. They just went, oh, well, we don't want to talk about that. So
sweep that one under the rug.
We've had some things in WA. They've banned a particular cartridge type because it can penetrate police armor. There was no shooting to preamble that. There was no incident that preambled that. There was no one shooting anyone with that. They just think tank got together and said, let's do it. And now all the other states sort of all looked at Western Australia and went, well, they got away with it over there. And then they'll try over here. So the way that it'll probably play out here in Queensland is they'll probably come after the sports shooters first because we do it for fun. Then they'll go after the hunters, and then they'll go after the primary producers, the farmers. And by doing that, they will divide and conquer. They'll separate us all up because no one wants to talk for anyone else because they're too scared they'll lose their guns, and they'll progressively get rid of them over time. So it's not a good state of affairs. It really isn't. But that's sort of what's on the horizon. Most people that are in the know, even with, we have a couple of groups that represent shooters here in Australia. They are moderately powerful lobbyist groups, nowhere near like the NRA in America. But they have a little bit of pull, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't lost our guns entirely. But yeah, they really don't want us having them. It's an easy vote winner for them, and it's very, very easy to make the public scared of them, and say, look, we need to take them away. So that's sort of what's on the horizon for us.
It's often a political tool to do these things, like with the zombie knife ban here. If you look at the statistics on knife crime, the majority of deaths and stuff like that are using kitchen knives and household knives and machetes. And the zombie knives, although big and scary, are not the big statistic, but it's the easy win politically.
Well, we're seeing that here with the firearms. So the majority of firearms crime in Australia, and when I say the majority, I mean like 99% of firearms crime is black market firearms that have been obtained illegally, some of which you can't even own, like they aren't physically possible for you to purchase. But they can't control that. So they're going after the law. Like sports shooters, for context, are the most law-abiding people. Like I have to have the perfect record to maintain a firearms license here in this country. You have to jump through every hoop. So it's not us that are causing the problem. It's obviously the black market, but they don't know how to manage that. So for them to win votes, they go, let's go after the sports shooters. Less firearms means better. They can't stop talking about the mass shooting in 1996, even though that there are now over a million, like in Queensland alone, there are over a million firearms, there are over 200 and something thousand licensed shooters in this state alone. And yet we very, very rarely have a gun related incident with a licensed shooter. I think we've had one in the last 3 years, and he wasn't technically a Queensland shooter. He was a New South Wales one. He came across the border. But yeah, so it's not a great state of affairs. And I think one of the things that scares me the most as a survivalist is that they will disarm us before we hit that SHTF situation, and we're going to be far worse off. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a bow hunter as well, because they haven't taken my takedown bow from me yet, and hopefully because no one uses those. No one uses them. Crossbows are licensed weapons, but the takedown bows and compound bows aren't yet. So
yeah, we'll get to sticks and stones eventually. Right, so
if they could, they would.
Yeah, definitely. Right, we're coming close to time, so we're going to mention your channel.
Sure.
So it is Australian Survivalist on YouTube. You also have a website, which is actually a really good quality website. I'm a web designer, so kudos for that. AustralianSurvivalist.media. So go and check them out. The links will be in the description. But do you just want to tell people a brief overview? Here's your elevator pitch for your YouTube channel. So do you want to just tell people what it's all about?
Yeah, for sure. So I founded Australian Survivalist about a year ago. My pivot into becoming a content provider, trying to provide more information that was relevant to Australians, stuff that just wasn't brought out from America. The big thing for me and what I sort of try to deliver is there's no sponsorship here. I have an okay paying job. I've got no interest in making YouTube a money avenue for me. So the things that I talk about on my channel, the things that I promote on my channel are purely because they're stuff that I've experienced. I like them. I think they work well. And I'm hoping that I'm able to sort of draw that divide and provide some information to people that you don't have to go, oh, well, hang on, if that was sponsored, am I actually getting what I'm paying for here? So that's obviously not what we're doing. We're providing honest reviews, honest advice, and basically a bit of direction so that people have a bit of a foundation in which to start from. And hopefully, although we're small now, we're hoping that we'll grow and reach more and more people, and it can only go up from here.
Excellent. Can I ask about the you had a break in your content and your camera stuff was stolen? What was that? Was that all about?
So I was just starting to ramp up, and I'd booked a ton of time off, and we were going out to a national park to film, I think, 4 consecutive segments. We were going to be out there for 2 weeks. So my camera equipment was actually with a friend of mine. They'd taken it to their place of work. They were basically filming at work for stuff at that job. And that, ridiculously enough, they got broken into. All that gear, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment got stolen. It took a ridiculous amount of time to get the insurers to replace it. There was a ton of backwards and forwards. And it screwed all the plans up, because sometimes we had to line this up with when my cameraman was free, when the national parks were open, when there wasn't fire bans, when there wasn't floods, because we get both of those at the same time here in Queensland. And worst timing. We lost momentum, and that's why we had such a big break. I'd hoped to have a lot more out, but we are now just starting to try and get a little bit more wind in our sails. And hopefully we will make it back out, do that shoot, and get a heap more content out for our subscribers, so they can basically see some of this equipment in use, in just not in my garage, but out there being used, and show you how it works and why it's so good.
That's awesome. What is your next planned video, if you don't mind me asking? Sneak peek.
So there's a couple of different things that are on the horizon, but the next one that's actually scheduled for release is a video talking about cross-loading. My last video, which was speaking about pack weight, I got a lot of people, very opinionated people, going, "Oh my God, that's way too heavy," or "You don't have the right stuff in there." And I hadn't had an opportunity to talk about cross-loading yet. So cross-loading, which is obviously where we take equipment and we cross-load it between multiple people so that we all share common stuff between the group, so that we're able to carry more equipment. That will be the next video that we put out. And it'll be talking a little bit more in detail about that. Plus, I've actually recently changed from a Rush 72 to a Rush 100 plus a Rush 12 on front of it now. So I'm changing the load out of that kit to make it a bit cooler, and we're going to include that in that video as well.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, so if you've not already, go and check out Australian Survivalist. The link is at the bottom there. It'll also be in the description. Make sure you give him a subscribe, and he's got some really good quality videos, to be fair. His production value is much higher than mine. I mean, you can see his backgrounds are already better than my chaos that goes on here. So, yeah, definitely. It's a channel that I see. I mean, when we had Ration Nerd on here, he was around 400, and 3 or 4 months later, he's up to 1,200 because of the quality of the videos he puts out. And this is very much the case with yourself, Jet. I really appreciate what you do. And you're not a fear-mongering doomsayer, which is what we need more of.
We got to have a bit of fun. Like, I get it. Look, the end of the world stuff, it's depressing. And one of the reasons that I pivoted into being a content creator, look, it's a lot of money to be spending. It's a lot of time. Let's enjoy this journey together. You know, it doesn't have to be something we hate. It can be something that we enjoy putting. I love putting the kits together and testing them and showing people how they work and seeing that value there. You know, there doesn't need to be monetary gain. It's good fun. So it's hopefully going to be a really good year.
Excellent. Would you like any final thoughts or say goodbye to the people?
So a massive thank you, Mark, for having us on the channel. It was really unexpected this small in our infancy to get invited onto a channel with as many subscribers as yours. You've been an absolute legend. You've asked some amazing questions, very thought-provoking stuff. It's been cool to hear about England as well. And a massive thank you to everyone on your channel that's tuned in and listened to me drone on for like an hour. I think this is a massive video for you, so my apologies.
Not a problem.
Yeah, it's been a great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and to everyone watching, thank you. Don't forget, like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and make sure you go and subscribe to the Australian Survivalist. You won't regret it. Goodbye.
Yeah.